Hey everyone, this is Scott from Narebo.com, and what I'm about to show you is one of the most complex airline liveries that I've created in a while. At least the last 6 months or so. Yep, it's the Air Canada Toothpaste livery on the Airbus A320, and I'm just getting right into it. You can see I'm here in Adobe Illustrator, starting with the most difficult part of the livery, which also happens to be the most interesting part. And yeah, starting with the maple leaf here in Illustrator, just going around tracing the edges of it, just so I can get the shape created, and then I can decide what I'm going to do from there. And honestly, I had no idea how I was going to do this yet. I didn't know if I was going to work entirely in vector format in Adobe Illustrator, or if I was going to go over to Photoshop, which is what I'm more familiar with and what I'm more comfortable working in. I can do anything in Photoshop, but I can't say the same thing for Adobe Illustrator. It's great for drawing logos and shapes like this, and even aircraft components, but for complex gradients, Photoshop is definitely the thing for me. So here I am in Photoshop, and I haven't really fully committed to it yet. I've just got my A320 template in here loaded up, turned off all the layers that I don't need, and just going to focus 100% on that vertical stabilizer. And I think it was right about this point where I was really starting to understand how complex this Air Canada Toothpaste livery is, because there's actually multiple layers of this maple leaf. And here I am back in Illustrator trying to figure out how they did that underneath, or that bottom layer. I thought maybe it was just a scaled up version of the maple leaf, and I was correct, it is. And I just eyeballed it. So I got this new shape created. And now I'm going to paste it back into Photoshop. I've got both layers now in Photoshop, and I can scale them to fit my template. And just getting it placed to match the photo as best that I can. You know, it's not rocket science. I'm not getting out rulers and measuring every millimeter. I mean, it's just eyeballing it, just trying to make it look as realistic as possible. So yeah, many layers. There's many layers to this. I added my color layer back in there just so I can get a sense of what's going on. I'm going back and forth between Illustrator and Photoshop just to make the adjustments, to make sure I've got the shapes drawn correctly, sized correctly, positioned correctly. And that's the thing, it just takes time. You just have to go back and forth, take your time, go slow, and it'll all work out, I promise. And, you know, that's the thing about airliner art that I think a lot of people don't realize, is that it's not that complicated. It's just the amount of time that you have to put into it is a lot, and it just takes a lot of trial and error just to figure out what works and what doesn't. And it's the ones who spend the time doing it and figuring it out, those are the ones who are successful and create the best art, in my opinion. Okay, so now, here's where it gets a little bit complicated. So the Air Canada Toothpaste livery uses a color halftone as the gradient. So it's not a smooth gradient. It's a little bit different than the way that other airlines apply gradients. It's kind of neat, actually. It's unique in the sense that it adds a little bit of texture to that gradient. Otherwise, it would just be flat or smooth, and it wouldn't look as interesting, in my opinion. And it's neat that they did that. I don't know why they did that. I don't know. It's probably easier to paint because you could essentially create this halftone gradient in a vector-based drawing program such as Illustrator. Basically what I'm saying is that it's a lot simpler. There are far less colors by using a dot pattern halftone gradient as opposed to doing a smooth gradient from one color to the next. So I don't know. Maybe that's the way they did it. All I know is that it was very difficult to recreate. Thinking back on this, I probably would have done this in Illustrator. The Photoshop color halftone mechanism or tool isn't all that accurate, and it's a little bit sloppy. And if you see when I zoom in at certain points, you'll see that it's not a very clean gradient. It's not a very clean dot pattern. It's a little bit messy for my liking. So I definitely would have done this in vector format if I had to do it all over again. You know, I could have done it all over again, but I don't want to do it all over again. This is a difficult livery to recreate. And yeah, you can see I'm getting there. I've got the gradient pretty much replicated. I had to use some overlay gradients on that forward bottom section of the vertical stabilizer just to kind of fade that dot pattern out a little bit. I couldn't figure out how to do that within the color halftone tool itself. So it's all smoke and mirrors. That's what I was just saying about spending the time with these livery illustrations, trying to figure out what works. I mean, a lot of what works is smoke and mirrors. You just have to try different things, and maybe it wasn't the way that the original designers intended it or the way that they created it, but you know, there's a million ways to solve the same problem, and this is the way that I chose to do it. Photoshop is probably not the best way to recreate a vertical stabilizer livery graphic element this complex, but that's what I'm most comfortable with, and that's what I chose to do. So now we are on to the easiest part of this livery recreation process, and that is the fuselage. And as you can see by the color, that is why they call this the toothpaste livery. It looks exactly like toothpaste, which is pretty cool. It's probably the best name for an airline livery that I've ever heard, in my opinion. Besides maybe the Northwest Airlines bowling shoe livery. I like that one too. But anyway, so this is Air Canada, and what you see me doing here is stealing graphic elements from an A330-300 illustration that I did a few years ago, and it's just faster that way. Normally, I recreate all of the elements from scratch in my livery illustrations. You've seen me do that in other videos, but the vertical stabilizer and that maple leaf graphic with the halftone gradient underneath was a lot of work, and I didn't really feel like going in and tracing out the Air Canada titles and doing all that stuff. So it's okay to use elements from past illustrations. No one's ever going to know, and it's just faster that way. Now I'm going back into my layers palette and turning on all the layers that I turned off earlier and adding colors to those. We've got the wing connection there, and now the engine itself, adding some color to that. This is a fairly simple color, and by using the multiply blending mode in the layers palette, which allows the color to remain bright and vivid, and also allowing the shadows and the shape of the object to show through underneath. Very powerful tool, and it's a game changer if you've never used it. Looks like I'm just about done here. Going through the layers palette, turning on the gloss layer that I had created before on a previous illustration. See, normally what I do is I've done so many of these livery illustrations that I started this one from another one that I did a long time ago, so I already had the high gloss layers baked in, or those layers were already created, and I didn't have to recreate them this time. But I've done that in previous videos, and if you want to see how I do that, definitely go back and check that out. So there you have it, the Air Canada Toothpaste livery on the Airbus A320. Let me know what you think about this one down in the comments below, and yeah, I hope you enjoyed it, and I will catch you in the next one.